Hi, it's Tess, and today I'm back to the don't just, but just. And for today, I'm talking about don't just criticize, but encourage. And I thought I've got a few different things that I can look back on in my career that were actually monumental and made me do things very quickly. So I figured I'd share these. And what's kind of cool is this article I found talked about how the scientific part of like how the brain works, depending on are you encouraging people or are you tearing them down. And in my career, and I think it goes hand in hand with my career because the type of career I worked, they've always had these what they refer to as weeder years. When you're learning certain jobs, they have certain years that it's almost like in college. There were certain classes that were kind of like those years that they knew you were going to either push through or you were going to drop. And my career was kind of that way too, because it was highly regulated, highly scrutinized, highly audited. Well, hi, Heather Yost, good to see you. And hi, Joan, and I need to reach out to Heather. But hello, good to see you guys. So my career has always been highly regulated, highly monitored, highly audited, highly time deadlined. It's been really highly scrutinized. So it does take its toll on people, which is probably why I appreciate very much getting connected with Chris Noggle and crew because I'm using my skills, but in a different way. But what I thought was so amazing is that when this article was talking, it talked about like doing brain scans. And when you encourage somebody or you criticize them, there's a difference in how the brain reacts. And negative, and of course the positive side is going to be just the opposite, but the negative is fear, anxiety, stress, anger, narrow focus. They can see in the brain where it causes you not to make changes. It creates an environment where you don't think clearly. It causes you to not be able to concentrate, and that makes the work product not as quality, and it also doesn't allow you to be open for improvements. So it was kind of interesting because I've worked in all kinds of environments, and I'll share a little bit about what's happened in that in my career, but it creates almost like a closing door. Everyone wants people to be open, but if you criticize and you condemn and you don't leave them open to feel safe to be able to share, they're not going to share. And I remember I worked for one manager, and really in her case, it was emotion driven. She needed to actually learn how to control her own emotions, because what she would do is, what I did is very regulated. Like we had quarterly, we would do brief monthly filings, but we had big quarterlies that we would do with all the states that we operated in. Annual statement was like 4 times the size of the quarterlies, and the quarterlies were probably, for each insurance company, probably 60 pages long. And then it was just more and more because we would report on both claims activity and reserve activity, that kind of stuff. But what I remember is this one particular manager, and again, I don't work for any of these people anymore, and most of them are retired, so they wouldn't even know, but every single quarter, and any of you who get emails will understand, she would send out like a 4-page blanket email to everybody in the financial reporting area of every single thing that she thought didn't go exactly right. And I mean, it was like really bad. So what ended up happening is, after a couple of years of putting up with this, a headhunter happened to reach out to me one of the days that this particular letter came out. I had an extremely strong background because I spent so many years in it. The next morning went to a meeting with a gentleman at the headhunter's office. That afternoon, I went to that was actually when I got into healthcare. I went into a healthcare office, interviewed because I had such a strong insurance background. The job was offered on the spot, and within 24 hours I was gone because I'd been fed up with it. I was done with it. It wasn't productive. It didn't work for me. I didn't know how it worked for anyone. But it was that negative. I didn't like that feeling, and I couldn't get her to understand, and that was how she managed. It would be like 3 or 4, really seriously, 3 or 4 pages every quarter of any little thing she thought didn't go right. And there were never a compliment for things that went right. If something went right, it was, well, that was your job. It was expected. She never acknowledged anyone. So needless to say, I was gone. Then I worked for another one where she truly had a theory, and this goes into like auditing, because in the days where they weeded out the auditors or like figured out who was going to go to partner, they like treat them like dogs when they come right out of college. At least in the old days, that's how they did it. I know things have changed now because they do masters instead. You know, they don't all have to go through the certain number of years in public accounting, but they really treated them badly, and some places are better and worse than those. But I ended up working for one of those partners that kind of came out on her own after a period of time not liking that. And she literally, truly, and would openly tell you that her theory was that you tear an employee down till there's nothing left, and if they walk away, they don't care because they'll just get another one. And I'm like, wow, this is terrible. And I lasted in that job for about 5 or 6 years only because it was interesting to me. I worked in the medical malpractice area of a healthcare system, and that was really interesting to me. But it made me think about, there are times in my career that it would have been very different, and I would have stayed a lot longer and shared a lot more of what I learned, because for the number of years I worked in this industry, I had a lot of information. I still hear from headhunters every single week. They call me back because I keep telling them I'm on projects for the next 6 months, and they keep calling me back and asking, like, yeah, in a lot of cases, it's like military. And in some of them, they were, you know, it is exactly that way. But it is a highly scrutinized industry. It's highly regulated. It's highly time sensitive. I mean, we actually had, because I worked for publicly traded companies, we had periods in time that if a sheet of paper, even though you all worked in financial reporting, you better not have a sheet of paper print on the printer and get left there, because you could be written up and terminated for that. So it was highly scrutinized depending on who you worked for, or what the rules were, or how close you were in proximity to another area, because that could be considered insider trading. So I mean, that is something you have to protect, because that is a legal thing. That's an SEC thing. But it's so funny how some of that, not even funny actually, that it goes further in. And that's why, like, even myself, I'm like, you know, at the point where it starts to interfere with your sanity, you move on to the next job. But the one thing I will say is that when I was young, when I was first getting into the work field, a headhunter came to me and she said, you have the personality. If we get you into this insurance industry, you'll have a job for the rest of your career. And she's right, because even now there's still things insurance related that keep coming to me, because I have a background that you just never, it would be hard pressed for somebody to ever match my background, because they would have to have had 35, 36, 37 years in an industry, because I started right out of high school and carried through like that. But it just made me realize that it does happen, whether you're a parent, whether you're an employer, whether you're a friend. Sometimes when we criticize, it's not helping that person. And what I loved about this article I read is that the criticisms actually show in the brain. It triggers differently. Almost like when we're teaching reading, based on how you approach it, it triggers differently. Our creative, artistic kids trigger differently in the brain. So that's why learning is different for them, which is why we do more of a multisensory, sequential, repetitive process. In the same way, they're showing studies that they actually looked at the brain, and the reaction in the brain to the negative approach, the criticisms, isn't the same as the encouraging. So I thought that was interesting, and for me, I find that to be true. I know there are some people they think are motivated by the beat down, so to speak, but overall, I haven't seen that to be helpful. And it is kind of damaging to employee morale. So I do think that, and those two examples I gave were the extremes. I worked for some amazing people over the years, but those were the two extremes. And for me, it probably was a good thing, because it taught me to move. When it was time that something like that started to drag me down, it allowed me to move. Because what I found in my career, and maybe it is because of the kind of career I worked, I had more skills than most in the industry that I had, which is why I was always sought after, because when something got bad like that, I moved on, and other people get it into their heads that they don't have the skills, so they get stuck. So in the industry I worked in, it was not uncommon to see people with 30, 40, 50 years in the job. And for me, I would go, okay, you know what? This is hurting my heart too much. I'm done, and I would move on. So I moved on a lot more often than people in my field did. But if it got to a point where it was too much, I said, okay, my quality of life, and I did let it get to me a few times in my career, but there were times that I had to look at it. And I guess I share this because I think even as a parent, as a tutor, these are lessons that I learned that probably made me, which is probably why I was when I tutored, I worked for the Dyslexic Institute, and I was the only one with a full-time job, and I had more one-on-one session hours per week than anybody else. But that is because I had developed skills to where I was more supportive and encouraging than some of the others. So I had a different approach, and that caused me to be sought after more. But I've always seen that you can develop people by encouraging them and by developing them versus criticizing them. So I guess since it's part of that meme that I found a few days ago, don't just learn but experience, don't just read, absorb, don't just think, ponder. This one about that criticizing and encouraging, it just made me remember there were two pivotal moments in my life where I was done. And the one where the manager more or less sent the 4-page email out. I went home, LinkedIn had sent me a notice, somebody wanted me. I went the next morning, and by that afternoon I had another job. But that was because the skill sets were there, and I had the strength to move on. If you let yourself, it's just like they say, like people in bad relationships. Sometimes you stay in it because I was talking to somebody recently, and I won't say who it was, but she said that what she started realizing is that she hated going home, or she hated when her partner was coming home, or her husband was coming home. She hated it every day, and it got to a point where she realized somehow something triggered her once to realize that it wasn't normal, that some people are excited when they come home, or when they have that their husband is coming home, and she realized it wasn't normal not to. And I thought that was really telling, because I think in the workforce too, sometimes that happens, that if you allow somebody or you allow a situation to continue, it will get to a point where you think it's normal. I had a medical condition once where the doctor said, "Why didn't you tell me you're in critical pain?" Because it had become normal. So I think that's where this is important to me, and that we can learn that we can do things in a way where we develop people and encourage people. We don't have to tear people down. And I'm hoping for the most part that doesn't exist anymore, because at least in this day and age, I think people will walk away a lot faster than they were when I was younger. Because you got to figure, I've got a number of years, so I went through some really hard times where people were afraid to move. And sometimes I probably held on a lot longer than I should have. But now I'm at that point in my life, I'm like, well, what are you going to do about it? Because now it's even different with, because in the old days, I'm going to really age myself, but in the old days, you put your resume together and you'd go through like industrial areas and pass them out. I can remember when I first had to start applying for jobs online, or this idea of remote working was non-existent. But it made me think about in the job environment, in the tutoring environment, and I think even in relationships with people, if the relationship is all negative and criticism, then maybe you aren't the right connection for each other. And I did find it telling when somebody recently told me that they got stressed and they were afraid to be sitting if their husband came home from work. And I thought, in all areas of our life, we can allow these criticisms to hurt us because we allow them to become commonplace. So I guess my hope is that if you start to recognize that you can hold on to something and move forward. Because I think we all have a gift to share in this world. And I hope we all have the opportunity to find that gift and to share it. And I think it's different. And I think it is in service to others, but in service to others, we help ourselves. But I hope that the people that have gone through the pain maybe in the past couple of years start to find that light of the things that make them feel good, and then live for the life that opens them up to what their true gifts are, so that they can leave the legacy behind that brings them joy. So I know I got off on a tangent here, but this one did speak to me because of a lot of things that I went through in my life, and I don't want to see anyone else go through any of that. I hope overall things are a lot better and that people are learning a different way, but if we recognize it faster, we can move on faster, because the world is smaller in a lot of ways, and our opportunities are much bigger. All we have to do is not close the door, stay open, and keep ourselves moving in a direction that feels right. If we listen and we take that time to calm, we can hear if we're headed in the right direction. But thank you guys for being here. Have a beautiful night, and we'll talk soon. And I'm sorry, I know I got long-winded on this one, but this one emotionally was very destructive to me many times in my career. And I would hope for other people that you recognize it and heal from it, wishing the best, and that learning for the person that you're leaving behind. And maybe all of us in this world can heal just a little bit every day. Thank you, and have a great night.